Under the Speaker's announced policy of January 3rd, 2001, the Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Paul, for 60 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I've asked for this time to spend a little bit of time talking about the assessment of our American Republic. Mr. Speaker, the beginning of the 21st century lends itself to a reassessment of our history and gives us an opportunity to redirect our country's future course if deemed prudent. The main question before the new Congress and the administration is, are we to have gridlock or cooperation? Today we refer to cooperation as bipartisanship. Some argue that bipartisanship is absolutely necessary for the American democracy to survive. The media never mention a concern for the survival of the republic. But there are those who argue that left-wing interventionism should give no ground to right-wing interventionism, that too much is at stake. The media are demanding the Bush administration and the Republican Congress immediately yield to those insisting on higher taxes and more federal government intervention for the sake of national unity. Because our government is neatly split between two concise philosophic views. But if one looks closely, one is more likely to find only a variation of a single system of authoritarianism, in contrast to the rarely mentioned constitutional, non-authoritarian approach to government. The big debate between the two factions in Washington boils down to nothing more than a contest over power and political cronyism, rather than any deep philosophic differences. The feared gridlock anticipated for the 107th Congress will differ little from the other legislative battles in recent Congresses. Yes, there will be heated arguments regarding the size of budgets, local versus federal control, private versus government solutions, but a serious debate over the precise role for government is unlikely to occur. I do not expect any serious challenge to the 20th century consensus of both major parties that the federal government has a significant responsibility to deal with education, health care, retirement programs, or managing the distribution of the welfare state benefits. Both parties are in general agreement on monetary management, environmental protection, safety, and risks, both natural and man-made. Both participate in telling others around the world how they must adopt a democratic process similar to ours as we police our worldwide financial interests. We can expect most of the media-directed propaganda to be designed to speed up and broaden the role of the federal government in our lives and in the economy. Unfortunately, the token opposition will not present a principled challenge to big government, only an argument that we must move more slowly and make an effort to allow greater local decision-making. Without presenting a specific philosophic alternative to authoritarian intervention from the left, the opposition concedes that the principle of government involvement per se is proper, practical, and constitutional. The cliche, the third way, has been used to define the so-called compromise between the conventional wisdom of the conservative and liberal firebrands. This nice-sounding compromise refers not only to the noisy rhetoric we hear in the United States Congress, but also in Britain, Germany, and other nations as well. The question, though, remains, is there really anything new being offered? The demand for bipartisanship is nothing more than a continuation of the third way movement of the last several decades. The effort always is to soften the image of the authoritarians who see a need to run the economy and regulate people's lives, while pretending not to give up any of the advantages of the free market or the supposed benefits that come from a compassionate welfare or a socialist government. It's nothing more than political have your cake and eat it too deception. Many insecure and wanting citizens cling to the notion that they can be taken care of through government benevolence without sacrificing the free market and personal liberty. Those who anxiously await next month's government check prefer not to deal with the question of how goods and services are produced and under what political circumstances they are most efficiently provided. Sadly, whether personal freedom is sacrificed in the process is a serious concern for only a small number of Americans. The third way, a bipartisan compromise that sounds less confrontational and circumvents the issue of individual liberty, free markets, and production, is an alluring but dangerous alternative. The harsh reality is that it is difficult to sell the principles of liberty to those who are dependent on government programs. And this includes both the poor beneficiaries as well as the self-serving wealthy elites who know how to benefit from government policies. The authoritarian demagogues are always anxious to play on the needs of people made dependent by a defective political system of government intervention while perpetuating their own power. Anything that can help the people to avoid facing the reality of the shortcomings of the welfare warfare state is welcomed. Thus, our system is destined to perpetuate itself until the immutable laws of economics bring it to a halt at the expense of liberty and prosperity. Third-way compromise or bipartisan cooperation can never reconcile the differences between those who produce and those who live off others. It will only make it worse. Theft is theft, and forced redistribution of wealth is just that. The third way, though, can deceive and perpetuate an unworkable system when both major factions endorse the principle. In the last session of the Congress, the majority party, with bipartisan agreement, increased the Labor, Health, and Human Services and Education appropriation by 26% over the previous year, 9 times the rate of inflation. The Education Department alone received $44 billion, nearly double Clinton's first educational budget of 1993. The Labor, HHS, and Education appropriation was $34 billion more than the Republican budget had authorized. Already, the spirit of bipartisanship has prompted the new administration to request another $10 billion, along with more mandates on public schools. This is a far cry from the clear constitutional mandate that neither the Congress nor the federal courts have any authority to be involved in public education. The argument that this bipartisan approach is a reasonable compromise between the total free market of local government or local government approach and that of a huge activist centralized government approach may appeal to some, but it is fraught with great danger. Big government clearly wins. Limited government and the free market lose. Any talk of a third way is nothing more than propaganda for big government. It is no compromise at all. The principle of federal government control is fully endorsed by both sides, and the argument that the third way might slow growth of big government falls flat. Actually, with bipartisan cooperation, government growth may well accelerate. How true bipartisanship works in Washington is best illustrated by the way a number of former members of Congress make a living after leaving Congress. They find it quite convenient to associate with other former members of the opposing party and start a lobbying firm. What might have appealed appeared to be contentious differences when in office are easily put aside to lobby their respected party members. Essentially, no philosophic differences of importance exist. It's only a matter of degree and favors sought, since both parties must be won over. The differences they might have had while they were voting members of Congress existed only for the purpose of appealing to their different constituencies, not serious differences of opinion as to what the role of government ought to be. This is the reality of bipartisanship. Sadly, our system handsomely rewards those who lobby well and in a bipartisan fashion. Congressional service too often is a training ground for, or a farm system for the ultimate government service, lobbying Congress for the benefit of powerful and wealthy special interests. It should be clearly evident, however, that all the campaign finance reform and lobbying controls conceivable will not help the situation. Limiting the right to petition Congress or restricting people's right to spend their own money will always fail and is not morally acceptable and misses the point. As long as government has so much to offer, public officials will be tempted to accept the generous offers of support from special interests. Those who can benefit have too much at stake not to be in the business of influencing government. Eliminating the power of government to pass out favors is the only real solution. Short of that, the only other reasonable solution must come from members' refusal to be influenced by the pressure that special interest money can exert. This requires moral restraint by our leaders. Since this has not happened, special interest favoritism has continued to grow. The bipartisanship of the last 50 years has allowed our government to gain control over half of the income of most Americans. Being enslaved half the time is hardly a good compromise. But supporters of the political status quo point out that, in spite of the loss of personal freedom, the country continues to thrive in many ways. But there are some serious questions that we as a people must answer. Is this prosperity real? Will it be long-lasting? What is the true cost in economic terms? Have we sacrificed our liberties for government security? Have we undermined the very system that has allowed productive effort to provide a high standard of living for so many? Has this system in recent years excluded some from the benefits that Wall Street and others have enjoyed? Has it led to needless and dangerous U.S. intervention overseas and created problems that we are not yet fully aware of? Is it morally permissible in a country that professes to respect individual liberty to routinely give handouts to the poor and provide benefits to the privileged and rich by stealing the fruits of labor from the hard-working Americans? As we move into the next Congress, some worry that gridlock will make it impossible to get needed legislation passed. This seems highly unlikely. If big government supporters found ways to enlarge the government in the past, the current evenly split Congress will hardly impede this trend and may even accelerate it. With a recession on the horizon, both sides will be more eager than ever to cooperate on expanding federal spending to stimulate the economy, whether the fictitious budget surplus shrinks or not. In this frantic effort to take care of the economy, promote education, save Social Security, and provide for the medical needs of all Americans, no serious discussion will take place on the political conditions required for a free people to thrive. If not, all efforts to patch the current system together will be at the expense of personal liberty, private property, and sound money.